All right, all right. I know this is the oldest, most far-fetched situation imaginable, but it happened. I wish I could tell you in some sophisticated or unusual way how I discovered my wife was cheating on me, but I can't. It happened like an old cliche from a bad fairy tale. I work for an auto parts company. I make brakes. Someone has to do it, and I'm one of the lucky ones. From 4 to midnight every day, 5 days a week for 8 hours, I operate one of the most archaic machines you've ever seen. I wear safety glasses, earplugs, steel-toed shoes, and a denim apron. Every day I fulfill my quota, and if I'm lucky, I get a bonus at the end of the year. I have a small 3-bedroom house, a beautiful wife, and 2 sons, both in elementary school. After 12 years of marriage, everything has been good until now. We have 5 stations that collect shoes. They all run on compressed air. In 8 years, we have not had any problems with the equipment. Today, in the middle of a shift, the compressed air system froze up. The air used to run all of our machines must be completely dry. It is filtered and dehumidified by automatic equipment that never fails. Well, almost never. Tonight, the dehumidifier system failed to release the moisture collected. I'm not a scientist, so all I know is that when moisture and high-pressure air come together, freezing occurs and everything stops. Instead of making us sit around doing nothing, they just sent the whole crew home, without paychecks, of course. You could say my whole life was ruined by the high humidity. When I opened the bedroom door, all I saw was a big, hairy back bouncing up and down on my wife, Marcy. Of course, I instinctively turned on the overhead light when I realized Marcy was awake. Damn it, Danny. What the hell are you doing home? I expected her to be startled, apologetic, and ashamed, but all I got was a pissed-off bitch. What the hell is going on? Don't be such a jerk. You know exactly what's going on. I'm sorry you had to see it, but if you'd gotten home when you were supposed to, this wouldn't have happened. He wouldn't be here, or I wouldn't have seen him. The hairy back flipped up and was now looking at me with a smirk on her face. Marcy pulled the bedspread up, trying to maintain her modesty. My big mistake was grabbing the guy. When he got out of bed, he was much bigger than when he was lying down. For my foolish enthusiasm, I was rewarded with 2 very, very hard punches to the ribs. I never managed to land a single blow on him, and I ended up on the floor, grunting and trying to catch my breath. I'm not sure, but I think it was around this time that I took a blow to the head that incapacitated me. Anyway, I ended up in the emergency room of the hospital, where some medical technician was bandaging my ribs. Marcy was sitting in a chair near the examination table with a look of disgust on her face. The technician finished and left the room. Marcy, who was that guy and what was he doing in our house? His name is Tony. He's a friend of mine and I invited him into the house. You were having fun with him. You were having fun with him in our bed. Our kids slept in the hallway. Yes, I know. If you hadn't made such a fuss, they never would have woken up. I had to ask my sister to watch them so I could bring you here. What the hell was he doing there? How many times are you going to ask the same question? We were having sex. Is that really so hard to understand? Does this happen regularly or was this the only time? Tony and I have been dating for about 6 months now. We've tried to keep it a secret from you. We don't usually come to the house, but I couldn't find a babysitter. Is it over now? No, it's not over. Danny, you're a good father and a good husband, but Tony is great in bed. I see no reason why we should end it just because it's out in the open. I promise you we won't meet in this house again. It's not fair to you or the kids. I'm sorry, Marcy. This is unacceptable. It will stop now. Danny, if you try to interfere with my relationship with Tony in any way, I can guarantee you'll regret it. You've just had the shit beaten out of you and Tony hasn't even broken a sweat. I assure you it will happen again. If you do or say anything, everyone we know will know that your wife is having fun with another man and you're too weak to stop it. All our friends and neighbors will be the first to know. I'll make sure your family finds out what a pathetic loser you are. The guys you work with will start calling you a cuckold. Think twice, Danny. Your life's gonna be hell. I bet even your sons will be embarrassed of you. You don't care what anyone thinks of you? You're going to make yourself look like a whore just to put me down? Yes, if I have to, but I'm willing to bet you won't risk it. Tony thinks you're a wuss, and I think he's right. You're going to have to learn to live with that, Danny boy. Who the hell is this guy? Where does he work? He doesn't work, Danny. He owns Continental Classics, a luxury car store on Lancaster Pike. You know, that place you always wanted to go in but never did. That's it? Danny, he's richer than you, he's smarter than you, and he's better than you in bed. He also seems to be stronger than you and better with his fists. Why don't you just marry him if he's so damn wonderful? That's why I keep you around, honey. Tony doesn't like children, and I have no intention of giving up mine to be with him. You'll play the role of husband and daddy, and Tony will get all the love. Why is that so hard for you to understand? I'm supposed to like that arrangement? You don't have a choice. Either you live with it or the whole world will know what a loser you are. By the way, I'm moving all your stuff into the guest room. I guess we don't have to share a bed anymore now that the cat's out of the bag. I watched Marcy get up to leave. I was even glad she was leaving. Just curious, honey, who watched the kids when you were with Tony? Karen usually looked after them, but every now and then I left them at your parents' house. By the way, it was Karen who introduced me to Tony. I mentally thanked Karen as Marcy left the room. The next morning I was discharged. Marcy wasn't there. I had the choice of calling someone or taking a cab. The cab won. The kids were at school and Marcy wasn't home. All my clothes and personal belongings were piled on the guest bed. I'm sure Todd and Terry would have questions about these preparations. I was going to let Marcy explain everything. It took less than an hour to get my new living space in order. During that time, all sorts of ideas ran through my head. There was no way things were going to work out the way Marcy had planned. The first thing I did was go to the basement and dig out my old cell phone recorder. It could only work on a landline, but I had no other choice. Marcy almost always called on her cell phone. It only took 20 minutes to plug it in and hide it behind some old paint cans. That was the first step. I felt lousy, but was well enough to go back to work. They gave me some pain pills, but I didn't want to take them and then work on the machinery. Instead, I took a couple of strong Tylenols. One thing Marcy had miscalculated badly about was my relationship with the guys I was working with. I told them everything that had happened the night before. They all had their own ideas, some good and some bad. It's nice to know that friends will be there for you when you need them. We had an 8-hour shift ahead of us, and each of us was going to spend it figuring out how to fix things. In the middle of the shift, we broke for dinner. Okay. Anyone come up with an idea? Glenn was the first to speak. I don't have an idea, but I have a cousin who works for the son of a bitch. He handles all the car parts. From what I understand, he hates DeMarco. If you need any information on the business, buildings, or work shifts, he can help you out. That would definitely be a help, Glenn. Anyone else? Danny, I have 2 shotguns and 2 pistols. You can have either one of them. None of them are registered, so you don't have to worry. Thanks, Barry, but that sounds a little more radical than I'd hoped. Well, hell, then you don't even want to hear my idea. Freddie laughed a little at that remark. Tell us, Freddie. Come on, tell us. I thought we could tie him to a tree with his legs spread apart and build an Indian-style fire between his legs. Everyone liked Freddie's idea, but it was unanimously rejected. Kyle was the only one who didn't suggest anything, so we all just stared at him while we ate our lunches. What, don't look at me like that. Yeah, I have an idea, but it's kind of shaky. Spit it out, Kyle. I remember reading somewhere about a prison in Arizona where they dressed all the pedophiles and child molesters in pink jumpsuits. It was supposed to be humiliating. I know this Tony isn't a child molester, but something like that would embarrass him to death. You mean put a pink jumpsuit on him? Wouldn't he take it off? I thought if you could sneak in there, tie him up, and then spray him on all sides with pink paint, that would work. But he'll know who did it. First, we have to render him unconscious, then leave him tied to a chair until he's found. How? Do we do it with drugs or hit him over the head? What do you have in mind? I can get a stun gun. All you have to do is sneak up and hit him. You say it's easier than it is. How do we get to him when he's alone? And how do we get close enough so he doesn't recognize? I don't have all the answers. I just thought it was an idea. The buzzer rang, and I was to spend another 4 hours behind the cars. My quota for the night was lower, so the other guys put in their own money to even it out. When I got home, Marcy was already in bed. At least she kept her word not to bring that asshole into the house. I had no idea what I was going to do. Most of the things the guys and I talked about were like school pranks. I might as well have put a burning bag of dog poop on his doorstep. I needed real revenge. When I got up, it was noon. The kids were at school and I could hear Marcy moving around the house. I took a quick shower, shaved, and headed out the door. Good morning, husband. Don't you have a kiss for your wife? She stood at the kitchen sink with her hand on her hip and smirked. I just turned and walked out the door. Her clever remark didn't deserve a response. I needed lunch and some time to myself. I spent the rest of the day killing time. I tried to figure out what I could do about my wife's sexy buddy without getting myself in too much trouble. Today, I needed to finish work and start getting ready. I decided to forego a home-cooked meal. It was the only time I spent with the boys, but I just couldn't force myself to eat Marcy's cooking anymore. Before I knew it, it was time for work. Things were pretty normal until dinner break. Danny, I have a stun gun in my car. I don't know if you'll be able to use it for anything, but at least it'll come in handy for self-defense. Kyle seemed proud of himself. Don't forget to pick it up before you go home. Have you ever used the damn thing? No. We can give it a try. Who wants to volunteer? The only answer was a chorus of groans around the table. No one had any new ideas, but they were all ready to support whatever I came up with. I felt better knowing I had a few friends. When I got home, everything was fine. The night was short for me. Working the graveyard shift messes up my sleep habits, especially on weekends. I got up earlier than usual. Todd and Terry jumped at the chance to spend time at Chuck E. Cheese's. Marcy didn't seem to mind at all, especially when I told her we'd be walking around all day. Danny, I need you to take a few days off next week. Tony's friend Wally is coming up from Detroit, and we're going on a cruise for 3 nights and 4 days to Cancun. If you can't make it, maybe see if your parents can? Let me get this straight. You're going on a sea cruise with 2 guys? That sounds a little lewd, even to you. Don't be rude, Danny. It's not right for you. Wally will be sharing a room with Karen. They've been old friends for a couple years now. Gee, I guess it's okay then. I tried my best to be sarcastic. I would definitely be thanking Karen later. Of course, I'd started the day too early. To kill time before Chucky's opened, we went to Hobby Lobby near home. The boys were already big enough to assemble most of the plastic models on the shelves. The end result was nothing to brag about, but they had a lot of fun. I left them to explore the hundreds of boxes while I wandered around the store, amazed at how much stuff creative housewives could buy. I guess if Marcy had been into crafts, she wouldn't have brought home that hairy gorilla. But now it was too late. My eyes lit up when I discovered rows and rows of designer paints and cans. There they were, 6 beautiful cans of pink paint in aerosol cans. They didn't have as much paint in them as Lou's or Home Depot, but they were pink. It was the only place I've ever seen paint that color in an aerosol can. Of course, I took that as a sign and bought all 6 cans. Todd got the set with the monster truck and Terry chose the tugboat. I didn't even know they made plastic models of tugboats. Before we left, I also bought a package of 10 large plastic cable wraps. They were about 18 inches long and looked like they would be enough for the whole job. By this time, the Chuck E. Cheese was ready to go. The kids killed about 4 hours and ate 2 pizzas before they burned themselves out. We grabbed a pack of cheap bread and headed to Pandora Park. The ducks ate everything in the first 10 minutes, but we stayed there for a couple more hours and then went to my parents' house. Mom and Dad happily hosted us for dinner in the evening. Todd and Terry spent most of the night in front of the TV, and I took advantage of that time to update Dad on the situation with Marcy. I realized that I was actually telling people what was going on before Marcy did. She was threatening to do the same thing I had done myself. Hell, it almost made her threats meaningless. Dad had promised they'd be there to take care of the boys, no matter what happened. That would make it a lot easier. I didn't want the boys to get hurt because of the situation. Around 9 o'clock, I called Marcy to let her know that we would be staying the night at my parents' house. I took the typewriter. After a hearty breakfast at IHOP, we arrived home and found Marcy still in bed. I immediately started the lawnmower and started in the backyard, near the bedrooms. Todd and Terry were itching to get to work on their models, even though it was a beautiful day outside. I let them go. I decided to devote a full day to lawn work. There was edging to be done and trimming to be done. It wasn't going as fast as usual because I stopped often to chat. I had a great pair of hedge clippers, but decided to borrow a set from Mike Fielding, who lives across the street. His wife, Mary, was one of the biggest gossipers in the neighborhood. I explained to Mike that there might be unfamiliar cars parked outside the house because Marcy would be entertaining male friends. Everything should be fine as long as they don't get drunk and rowdy. If that happens, just call the police. It was hard for me to control the situation since I worked nights. Larry Finley was on the board of directors of the local church. I borrowed a candle key from him and apologized for Marcy's recent wild behavior. Of course, he wanted to know what I meant. Larry was an even bigger gossip than Mary Fielding. In 10 minutes, he had enough material to last him a month. I didn't break for lunch and finished my work around 4 in the afternoon. After a quick shower, I went to Rosie's Cantina and ordered the most expensive dish on the menu. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it was definitely delicious. I spent the rest of the evening with my brother Dave and his family. Dad had already told him what was going on. I spent the night on his couch. My wife had a great plan. She was going to force my obedience by threatening to expose me as a cuckold. If I refused to condone and support her infidelity, she would make my life miserable. It was an interesting idea, but it had a lot of holes in it. Not even a week later, I had already told everyone what was going on. That negated her threat to some extent. Besides, I managed to make her look like a slut in a way she never imagined. I don't think she expected any backlash. The next day after lunch, I stopped by the house to change for work, and a furious Marcy was waiting for me. "What the hell have you been telling the neighbors?" "Karen said you've been telling everyone like I run a brothel here at night." "Bullshit." "That's not true, Marcy. I just explained to them that you can entertain men while I'm at work, and that they shouldn't get excited about it." "Well, that's not true." "Who else did you talk to?" "With everyone. I figured I'd tell them before I told you. It was easier that way." "I didn't say anything to your parents or your sisters." "You should probably do that before word gets out to them." "Damn it, Danny. You're making me look like a whore." "Well, that's fair enough. You were going to make me look like a cuckold." "Bastard. Sorry, honey, but I have to go to work." Before I left, I managed to spend some time with the boys. The hardest part was not getting the time I wanted to spend with them. Glenn had the best news of the evening. Continental Classics was closing at 9 o'clock on Thursday night, so Tony could personally write all the checks for Friday. He hated being disturbed during payroll, so even the janitor was gone. Kyle took a few minutes and showed me how to use the taser. No one volunteered to try it out. The plan was taking shape. If I got caught, which I fully expected, I was looking at jail time. But I didn't care. Tony DeMarco was going to be humiliated. If I was arrested, I would make sure that all the newspapers and TV stations got the full story. Any such publicity would crush him, or at least make him angry enough to do something stupid. For the next few days, I came home only to sleep, shower, and change clothes. I hadn't eaten at home since that very first day. Finally, Thursday came. I arranged for my truck's battery to die, and Kyle came to pick me up. The shop foreman never really bothered the brake guys much. As long as we met quotas and the quality was good, they left us alone. One thing that was good for me was the OSHA work requirements. In apron, gloves, and welding goggles, we all looked the same. At 8:30, I slipped out the back door. The guys took turns working on my station. One of their posts would be vacant, of course, but no one cared. Restroom breaks were commonplace and never monitored. The main thing was to give the illusion that I never left. I walked through the door for the Continental Classic staff and headed straight for the restroom. Around 9 o'clock, someone did a quick check before turning off the light. 10 minutes later, I put on latex gloves and walked out of the restroom and into the semi-dark office space. His desk overlooked the showroom, so he was standing with his back to the door. It seemed to be easier than I expected. There was a computer in front of him, and he was picking at an old adding machine with a paper tape. He didn't hear me approach. I hit Tony right in the neck with the stun gun. His body jerked upward, and I thought he was going to turn around, so I hit him again. This time he jerked a few times, but then relaxed. Perfect. I put 2 plastic cables on each leg and 2 on each arm. I brought an old neckerchief with me to use as a blindfold. He was very cooperative. I rolled his chair up to a glass display case near the showroom. It would be perfectly visible when his people came to work in the morning. It turned out a beautiful pink color, but I had to use a lot more paint than I intended. The paint absorbed into his clothes as quickly as I sprayed it. It took at least 3 coats on one area to get it just the way I wanted it. There was enough paint, but barely. It looked very pretty in the pink color. Finished, I carefully put it all back together. I expected Tony to wake up while I was decorating him, but he never moved. I also planned to take the blindfold off before I left. I checked my watch a few times. I was well within my allotted time frame, but I still wanted Tony to be awake before I left. After 5 minutes, I was already starting to worry. I tried unsuccessfully to feel for a pulse. Perhaps I couldn't feel it because of the latex gloves. I took off the glove and tried again. There was still no pulse. I tried to feel for a pulse on my neck like they do on TV. Still couldn't find anything. I took the blindfold off and touched his eyeball with the tip of the pencil. He didn't blink. There was no reflex. Needless to say, I started to panic. But I had enough sense to put on a latex glove and wipe off anything I might have touched. I put the tie in my pocket and then cut off all the plastic ties. You could see traces of pink paint on them. It looked strange. The white skin under the tie made it look like a pink raccoon. I took another minute to make sure I hadn't overlooked anything, and then went to work. On the way to the shop, I threw everything I had with me, including the stun gun, down the storm drain. 10 minutes later, I was making brake pads again. No one noticed my absence. Once the shift was over, I told the guys what had happened. They were all accessorized, so I was sure no one would say anything. Freddie was very impressed. None of them looked worried. Kyle drove me home, and we both mentally noted the time he dropped me off. I didn't sleep as long as I usually did. Around 10 o'clock, Marcy burst into my room. "What the hell did you do? What did you do, you little bastard?" Of course, I just rolled over onto my back and gave her a perplexed look. "What the hell are you talking about, woman?" "Tony's dead." Karen called and said he was found dead in his office this morning. "I believe you had something to do with it, and I'm going to make sure you pay, you bastard." That was the second time she had called me a bastard in the last 5 minutes. It was pretty clear I wasn't going to get any more sleep, so I stumbled out of bed and headed for the bathroom. I was in no hurry to face the Wicked Witch of the East, so I took a long, hot shower and shaved slowly. I even applied some aftershave just to please my loving wife. I never got to the coffee pot. There was a tall black man standing in the living room talking to Marcy. His hair was cut very short and he was wearing a dark suit. The bitch had called the police. There was no doubt about it. I shook my head and made my way to the kitchen to grab my first cup of the day. Marcy smirked wryly as I settled into my favorite chair. My uninvited guest sat down as I did. "Mr. Mercer, my name is Detective Darnell Green, with an E. I'm here about the death of Anthony DeMarco last night. Your wife reported that you and Mr. DeMarco had a disagreement last week, and I was wondering if I could ask you some questions." "Of course. I have no objections, but not here." "What do you mean?" "If you want to talk, let's do it in your office instead of at my house." "Do you mind?" I couldn't help but notice the frown on Marcy's face. I was sure she was counting on being part of the discussion. "My car or yours, Mr. Mercer?" "I have a few other things to do, so I'll meet you there." "Any particular office?" "Back of the second floor. Room 206. Just turn right when you get off the elevator. I'll see you soon." While I was putting on my shoes, Marcy kept up a steady pace. I never finished my coffee, so I just poured it down the sink. I turned and smiled as I walked out the door. "I think you're getting what you wanted, sweetheart." "What are you talking about? What the hell do you mean, Danny?" 10 minutes later, I was sitting with Detective Green on the second floor of the municipal building. For the next hour, Detective Green asked all the right questions, and I had all the right answers. He tried to be tactful about the affair without ignoring it or poking me in the face. Of course, I had to admit that I had a motive, but I never could do anything about it. It was a serious situation, but I tried my best to be condescending and not be a smartass. I think he appreciated the fact that I made his job easier, even if I didn't have an answer for him. The most interesting part of the conversation was learning that Tony had died of some kind of heart problem. He had been fitted with a pacemaker a couple years ago, and I guess it didn't mix well with the stun gun. Of course, they knew about the stun gun from the marks on his neck. I was sorry that Tony was dead, but at the same time I was glad. Detective Green gave the usual "don't leave town" speech and said he'd contact me when he checked my alibi. I never thought I'd need an alibi. It was kind of exciting. We parted on good terms. I felt like Darnell Green was on my side. It made me feel warm in my heart. I grabbed a snack and watched the news on TV. There was a story about the death of a local businessman. It mentioned that there were no known relatives in the area. I emptied my bank accounts and then took a moment to eat a hearty breakfast. There were still some things to do at home. Marcy wasn't home when I returned. It took me 30 minutes to move all my stuff into the bedroom and all of Marcy's stuff into the guest room. The guest room had one small closet and one dresser. I stacked all the stuff on the bed so she could put it away. I checked the phone recorder in the basement. There was nothing significant on it. I gathered up all the bank and insurance documents, as well as other important papers. I was glad Marcy's Volvo was registered in my name. It would make things easier. Everything was folded in a folder under the front seat of my truck. I called work and took a 2-week vacation. A few hours later, my loving wife showed up. She seemed surprised to find me home. It was time to get things in order again. I smiled as I led her into the guest room. "What the hell is this? Who the hell do you think you are?" My answer was a wide smile. "Answer me, damn it. What's going on?" "Marcy, from now on, I'll be staying in the master bedroom. You can have the guest room. I suggest you start folding your clothes. Anything that isn't in your closet or dresser by dinner time will be thrown out. Any questions?" "I can't stuff my stuff in this small closet, and I have no intention of staying in this room." "What the hell do you mean by get rid of?" "If you can't put things away in a closet or dresser, then you don't need them." "That's not going to happen, Danny. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it's not going to work. You're dead. I suggest you start putting things in order. If you have any more questions, I'll stop by later." "Bastard!" That's the third time she's called me a bastard today. I must be doing something right. While Marcy was busy in the guest room, I dumped her purse on the kitchen table. I took my time gathering everything I needed. First, I took her cell phone and then her car keys. From her wallet, I pulled out her driver's license, all of her credit and debit cards and money. I put back everything that was left. I took her car papers out of the pickup truck and then drove the Volvo across town to a friend of mine who had a parking lot. I sold him the car for a good price, arranging for him to sell it wholesale out of town. Even with the payments, I got a few $1,000s in my pocket. I was just about to stop by Taco Bell for lunch when my cell phone rang. "You son of a bitch! What did you do with my cell phone, and where the hell is my car?" I was glad she didn't call me a bastard again. She was calling from her home phone. This was a good test. I could check the recorder when I got home. "I'm sorry, honey. I had to get money to hire a lawyer to defend me against murder charges. I promise to buy you another car as soon as I get out of jail." She was still cursing on the other end of the line when I hung up and turned the phone off. After that conversation, I decided that a lawyer would indeed be a good idea. No matter what happened, I wasn't going to stay married. However, that would have to wait because I was next in line for an order. Todd and Terry were home when I arrived. I headed straight for my sons and ignored Marcy. Truth be told, I glanced in her direction a few times and noticed that she wasn't happy. The boys couldn't wait to show me the models they had put together. When Marcy started to prepare dinner, I wandered down the hall to the guest room. All my clothes were lying on the bed. All of Marcy's clothes were in the master bedroom. I grinned to myself but decided not to resist. She was firm and determined now. Marcy told the boys to wash the dishes for dinner, and I went to the guest room to put my things away again. I would have loved to throw all her stuff away, but it seemed too childish. Today I treated myself to a meal at Red Lobster. It wasn't extra money, as I still had money left over after giving the divorce lawyer a deposit. The shrimp and lobster combo was great, but the cheese rolls were still my favorite. After finishing my meal, I turned on my cell phone again. I was hoping one of the guys from work or Detective Green would call. No such luck. The first call was from my wife. "Danny, how do I go to the grocery store?" "We need milk and a few other things." "I'll drive you when I get home. Try to arrange for us to shop on Saturdays when I'm not working. It'll be easier for me if you don't shop alone." "Oh, I got another call. I gotta go. We'll talk when I get home." The second call was from Kyle. Detective Green talked to the entire team, both individually and together. All the stories checked out. Tom Tingle, the floor manager, was the strongest supporter. He insisted that there was no way I could miss work. He kept a strict eye on all his men and could guarantee that I was there all night. I realized I wasn't that smart. If some forensic scientist wanted to prove that I'd killed Tony DeMarco, I'm sure he could do it. I was starting to feel like nobody cared. I got home just in time to put the boys to bed. Marcy was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. I grabbed a cold Foster's from the refrigerator and made myself comfortable in the chair. The TV wasn't on, so I decided now would be a good time to talk to Marcy. So, Marcy, how's the plan to turn me into a wuss and a cuckold going? That was the end of the conversation before it could begin. She finished her wine, got up, and went to her bedroom. I thought she wanted to talk. Guess I was wrong. I grabbed my beer and went to check the recorder. The first call was to her sister. There was no backup. Turns out Marge knew all about the affair with Tony and was supportive of Marcy in every way possible. That was good to know. The next call was to Marcy's mom, and it was a little different. Mom had no idea what was going on. Her daughter convinced her that Tony was a friend of Karen's, and that I was jealous because I had been trying to have sex with Karen for years. Tony lectured me about it, and I got angry. She never said I killed it, but she hinted at it. She called the cell phone company to see if she could get a replacement for the phone I took, but got nothing. She then called the DMV to report that I had taken her driver's license. She was told to report it to the police. She called the bank to ask for a replacement credit card, but was told the account was closed. I'll tell you what, she was a busy girl. The last call on the answering machine was to Karen. Karen lived just a few houses away, so I have no idea why they used the phone instead of just meeting up. Of course, that went in my favor. I learned two important things from that call: that Wally was still on his way from Detroit, and that Marcy was going to lay low and not make a fuss until he got there. The next day, the boys and I got up bright and early. We were out of the house before Marcy even woke up. We got home after lunch, and Marcy insisted that I take her to the grocery store. She needed things, and since she no longer had a car or driver's license, I had to take care of it. That night, while she was making dinner, I checked the recorder. Wally had arrived, and the first person he called was Marcy. It was an interesting conversation. He believed everything Marcy had told him and vowed revenge. Wally and Tony had grown up together, and he didn't want to let that go unchallenged. He gave Marcy the phone number where he was staying and told her to call him the next day as soon as she had a chance. Marcy immediately called Karen and excitedly told her how happy she was. I couldn't believe that this was the same woman I had been married to all these years. The change was so sudden and so complete. I had no idea that my actions were so bad that I deserved such a thing, except for killing her lover. Before I went to bed, I went out for a hamburger. Of course, the lawn needed to be mowed again, so I had a good excuse to avoid Marcy the next day. Around 11 o'clock, Marcy's mom and dad came to pick up the boys. I had no idea that an overnight stay with relatives was planned, but I decided not to protest. Tomorrow was a school day, and Grandma Wilcox promised they'd be there on time. I couldn't wait to check the phone recorder, but lunch came first since I had skipped breakfast. After a quick shower, I headed to the Denny's. Marcy didn't say a word about me not eating at home anymore. Marcy and Wally had devised a plan to avenge Tony's death. It was all pretty comical. I guess if I hadn't known what was going on, it wouldn't have looked like this. After Marcy and I went to bed, Wally was going to enter the house through the sliding door from the back patio. She promised him it would be unlocked. If everything went according to plan, it would look like I'd been shot in a robbery attempt. Marcy and Karen would have called 911 when they heard the gunshot. I know it sounds silly, but at that moment I remembered that I hadn't changed the beneficiaries on my insurance policies. On my way out the door, I kissed my wife Riley and got the finger in return. I had dinner with my parents and spent the evening there. Before leaving, I borrowed a snake charmer from my father. A .20 caliber short-barreled shotgun would be perfect for an evening party. When I got home, Marcy was already in bed, but her light was on, so I assumed she was reading. The only call on the recorder was from Karen. She was bragging about the great sex she and Wally had enjoyed all day. Before saying goodbye, she promised Marcy that she would be ready for tonight. It took me about 20 minutes to replace the buckshot in the shell casings with rock salt. I had a full sack left over from last winter. I didn't want to kill Wally, only slow him down. Hell, I didn't want to kill Tony either. I hoped Wally didn't have as bad a tick as Tony did. I wanted to check the door to the back lot, but I was afraid Wally might see me. I had to assume that Marcy had left it unlocked. I stripped down to my underwear and tangled the blankets on the bed. A cup of coffee would have been nice, but there wasn't any, so I decided to make do with a Coke. I waited, sitting in the chair with my cell phone in hand. He didn't show up until after midnight. As soon as I saw him on the deck, I dialed 911 and reported that there was an intruder in my house. I was careful to say that I feared for my life. I didn't hang up. The patio door quietly opened and Wally appeared in it. I waited until he was fully inside and gave him the first volley. I aimed for the lower part of his body because I didn't want to accidentally kill the son of a bitch. The first shot threw him back on the deck. When the second one hit him, he tumbled over the side of the deck, breaking the railing. I realized I hadn't killed him because he howled like a piglet. That rock salt must have really hurt. I was amazed at how loud the sound of the gunshot was in the house. My ears were ringing. I turned on the light, and within seconds, Marcy was standing in the living room screaming. She was actually screaming out words, but I couldn't make them out. I went over to see how Wally was doing and saw a Ruger .22 caliber automatic with a silencer on the floor. Marcy was still screaming, and I pointed the shotgun in her direction. She quickly shut up and ran out of the room. Looks like Wally broke his ankle in the fall. Some guys are lucky. 10 minutes later, the first black and white showed up. There was no special discussion. I put the shotgun on the floor so no one could misinterpret what was going on. I pointed to the phone, and one of the officers informed the 911 operator that everything was under control. They asked who else was in the house, and I told them about Marcy in the bedroom. They brought her into the living room and discovered they had made a big mistake. Her mouth was open by a mile. I tried to fend her off while the police officers tried to shut her up. None of us succeeded. Finally, a larger-than-life uniformed woman gently took her by the arm and led her outside. I noticed that Karen was standing outside with the other neighbors. I smiled at her and slowly ran my index finger down her throat. She turned and walked quickly away without responding to my smile. The ambulance crew arrived for Wally at the same time Detective Green showed up. He smiled when he saw me, and I answered him with a wide grin. I wasn't trying to be a smartass, but I just couldn't help myself. The Amazon cop brought Marcy back into the house so she could get dressed. She had already calmed down a bit. After I got dressed, we all went to police headquarters. I insisted on separate cars, so Detective Green let me ride with him. We didn't talk on the way downtown, but he looked at me and smiled again. It was already dawning when Green let me go. We only talked for about 30 minutes, but they kept me around all night. I felt like I was in Guantanamo because they kept making me drink coffee. One of the black and white cars drove me home. I was a little disappointed because I was expecting to see yellow tape strung around the house. It looked like nothing had happened. The rock salt hadn't even broken the glass siding door. Apparently, Wally had gotten most of it. I estimated it would take about an hour to fix the broken railing. I went to bed and didn't get up until after lunch. After emptying my bladder, I staggered into the kitchen and found my friendly detective sitting at the table, reading the newspaper and drinking fresh coffee, which I realized he had made while I slept. I'd had as much coffee as I wanted the night before, so I settled on a large glass of juice and sat down across from him. I have no idea how he got in. You're a cool dude, Mr. Mercer. He didn't lift his eyes from the paper. I didn't know what to say to that, so I stayed silent. I couldn't tell if he was playing me or not. He finished his coffee. Detective Green, I need to shower, shave, and eat lunch. I'll buy one if it's not against police policy. Take your time, Danny. I've got all day ahead of me. As I headed for the shower, I wondered when he was sleeping. Lunch consisted of 2 large pulled pork sandwiches. Green even joined me, washing them down with beer. Neither of us said anything, and after a while the silence became overwhelming. You're dying to ask me some questions, aren't you, Mr. Mercer? Funny, I was thinking the same thing about you. My detective friend waved at the waiter and ordered 2 more drafts. I've been asking you questions all night. Now it's your turn. So, for starters, where's my wife? She's still with us. She'll be arraigned this afternoon. I finished my beer. Your wife's parents found her a lawyer. This was something I hadn't expected. Now I had 100 more questions, but the problem was that the more questions I asked, the more I risked exposing myself. I decided it was best to back off. It was good to see that Marcy's family was willing to help her because I wouldn't be there. I have no more questions, Detective Green, but if you feel the need to talk it out, you can start any time. He took a big sip of beer and laughed, softly but quite definitely. One more thing. You didn't happen to overhear or tape record the conversations your wife had with Mr. Williams, did you? I assume you mean Wally? This elicited a slight chuckle from me. And if I had such a record, would you need it? I don't know yet. If it goes the way I think it will, it won't change anything, but if one of them has a good lawyer, it might. If I have a record like that, won't I get in trouble for it? You're right about that. I'm just trying to make my job easier. I'll see what I can do without the tape, which may or may not exist. I nodded my thanks. Danny boy, I think I should take you home. Your boys will be home from school soon and they need their father. We pulled up to the house just as the school bus dropped Todd and Terry off. They came up to us and I introduced them to my new detective friend. They wanted to see his badge. Everything seemed pleasant enough until Green leaned forward and said, "So, which one of you built the tugboat and which one of you built the monster truck?" "I built the truck," Todd shouted, sticking out his chest. "And I built the tugboat. Would you like to see it?" Terry was just as proud. "Maybe I'll get a chance to look at them next time. Right now I have to go." He left me standing stunned and walked to his car with a wide, shit-eating grin on his face. That son of a bitch knew about the pink paint. He had my balls in his hands and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. That night we ordered pizza. The boys never asked where their mom was. After dinner, Marcy's dad called and said he needed help raising bail money to get her out of jail. I tried to be as polite as possible, but I turned him down. I'm not sure he understood what was going on, but at least he was trying to be a good father. I asked him where she was going to stay. He hesitated for a bit and then said she was staying with them. The boys and I loaded all of Marcy's stuff into the pickup truck and drove them. We had no trouble packing everything up. When we got home, I noticed the U-Haul truck in the driveway of Karen's house. The next morning, it was gone. Marcy never called me. I had to read the newspaper every day to find out what was going on. No one told me anything. In fact, it was as if I was being kept in the dark on purpose. There was no trial. Marcy put all the blame on Wally. Wally claimed it was her idea. In the end, they both pleaded guilty. Marcy got 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit murder. Wally got 5 to 10 years for attempted murder. About the silencer that Wally had with him, the federal people were called in. They decided to wait until Wally served his first sentence before making changes. Detective Green didn't need the tape and never mentioned it again. Karen disappeared and was never seen or heard from again. My father was glad to have his gun back and promised that I could borrow it again if I needed it. When he said that, he hummed. I asked Marcy to serve me with divorce papers as soon as she started serving her time in jail. She didn't protest. I got the impression she wanted nothing to do with me because I hadn't seen her or talked to her since the night I shot Wally. I sold the house and moved back in with my parents. I couldn't work and watch the boys myself. The guys at work were glad to have me back. For some reason, I was offered to move to the day shift, but I declined. Every month, I took the boys to the Muncie Women's Prison to visit their mother. I waited for them in the car because they were usually there for less than an hour. Sometimes, in good weather, the meetings would take place outside. I was able to park and watch them through the chain-link fence. I never asked them about the visits and asked them not to tell me anything. It seemed to suit us all. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until I got a phone call. "Hello. Is this Daniel Mercer?" "Yes." "My name is Angela Hawkins. A detective named Darnell Green said I should call you. There's something we need to discuss." "I know Detective Green, but why do you want to talk to me?" "Tony DeMarco was my brother." "Oh, shit. Just when I thought all that shit was behind me, something like this happened." "I don't think this is a good idea. I'm sorry for your loss, but there's nothing I can do to help you." I hung up before she could say anything else. 2 days later, she called again. "Daniel, I would really appreciate it if you would come to me. There's something I need to say. Detective Green said you're a reasonable man." "Where did you want to meet?" "I'd prefer to do it at the car dealership, but you can do it anywhere that's convenient for you." It took me a few moments to come up with something. "I'll meet you Saturday morning at 10 o'clock at the car dealership. I'll bring my 2 sons with me. They love looking at old cars." I didn't know what she meant, but I felt safer in a public place when the boys were around. I wasn't using them as a shield or anything, but I felt like she'd have less of a chance to try anything if they were with me. I had no idea what kind of grudge this woman might hold. If she's Tony's sister, she must be Italian. If she's Italian, she must be hot blood. And if she's hot blood, I must be careful. At this point, I decided I was thinking too much about all of this. I needed a beer. I called Detective Green and asked him what was going on. He laughed and told me to meet her and stop worrying. It was easy for him to say since he didn't kill her brother. Continental Classics was a big and impressive place. In addition to the main showroom, they had two large buildings in the back where they stored cars that needed restoration or were waiting for a spot on the show floor. When we pulled up, I was shocked to see that they were having a grand opening celebration. I hadn't expected such a thing. There was a lot I didn't realize. Terry and Todd seemed torn between cars and free gifts. My first impression was the smell from the popcorn machine. A guy in rubber-nosed boots was handing out small bags of hot popcorn. To the side was a soda machine and another clown with a hot dog cart. The boys wouldn't need lunch today. It wasn't hard to recognize Angela Hawkins. I recognized her as soon as I noticed her walking straight toward me with a slow, determined gait. Everything about her said Italian: dark hair, dark eyes, olive complexion, and wide hips. I don't think a gentleman would have noticed her hips, but they were accentuated by her height. 5 feet, no more. Tony was huge and his sister was short and wide. I felt myself starting to get a little worried as she approached, and then I noticed a smaller clone next to her. The girl looked to be about 10 years old, and she was an exact replica of Angela, except her hair was a little lighter, and naturally she had no hips at all. My hostess seemed to be covering herself in the same way I was. We were a pretty pathetic couple, both using our children for security. As she shortened the distance between us, her hand extended in greeting. Daniel Mercer, I presume? It was only natural and polite to take her hand and shake it. I've always wanted to say that, like in the movie about Dr. Livingston. She was smiling but seemed a little nervous, and I felt a little relieved. I stood there like a mute, and she continued talking. This is my daughter, Carla. Carla smiled at the boys and me. Todd smiled back politely and said his name, and Terry held out his hand with a smirk on his face. Carla, why don't you show the boys around while I talk to their father? Terry immediately followed Carla into the showroom, while Todd headed for the hot dog stand. I took that as a good sign. Can we talk here or in my office? Your choice? I think the office would be fine. Those were the first words out of my mouth. As we walked toward the stairs leading to the elevated office, I noticed several employees looking in my direction and making remarks to each other. Angela noticed too and smiled at my discomfort. All of the salespeople on the floor were wearing blue bowling shirts, so they were easy to spot. Unfortunately, they all seemed more interested in me than the customers. One guy at the far end of the building smiled broadly at me and gave me a thumbs up. I smiled back but felt a little nervous. Did Detective Green tell you anything about my situation? I didn't answer anything, just shook my head as a sign that he hadn't. I don't want to bore you with my life story, but I think you need to know a little. Tony was my brother and my only relative. There are no other relatives. When Tony died, he didn't have a will. Since I was the only relative, I inherited his business. The executor took a big chunk, but I still got more than I expected. I was glad that at least someone had benefited from the whole story. While she was explaining it all to me, I noticed that her ears were pierced and she wore a wedding ring. She had a small silver cross hanging around her neck, but it was hard for me to see it because my gaze kept focusing on her cleavage. I was just starting to remember how long it had been since I'd had sex when she interrupted me. Mr. Mercer? Are you paying attention? It was a trick question. She smiled as she asked it. I'm sorry. I was just admiring your crucifix. I was coaxing myself to look only into her eyes and pay attention when she slapped my arm. Want a beer? That would be a good idea. She opened the tab and handed me the can, trying not to lean over. We each took a few sips without saying anything. Miss Hawkins, I'm glad it worked out for you, but I'm not quite sure why I'm here. I should get back to the boys before they start to worry. It would be better if you called me Angela. May I call you Danny? Sure. Are we done? Hell no. Just sit there and don't move until I'm done. Detective Green said you'd understand. I didn't answer. If I kept my mouth shut, she'd finish faster. Tony was a bastard. He was a worthless son of a bitch and he deserved to die. As strange as it may seem, I wanted to thank you. It was a trap. The damn detective had set me up. Were there bugs in the room or was it her? She might as well have had a bug hidden in her bra. Damn it, I looked at her cleavage again. Are you wearing a wire or any kind of recording device? Of course not. Why would I do something like that? I finished my beer, though I still wasn't convinced. Maybe I'd better go down and see what the guys are up to. I wouldn't want them to get in any trouble. Just sit. She seemed to have a pretty definite attitude. There was no love lost between Tony and me. About 3 years ago, my husband was killed in an accident. He had no life insurance, and the person who hit him had no insurance at all. I had no job skills and a daughter to raise. Tony was my only relative, so I asked him for help. He paid part of my husband's funeral expenses, and that was the end of it. He wouldn't even return my calls. Are you saying that his death was a blessing to you? Yes, and apparently for you too. Maybe we should both thank him for what happened and leave it at that. Angela smiled and finished her beer. You don't want to talk about it anymore, do you? I nodded and started to rise from my chair. I need a favor from you. You're the only one who can help me. What can I do for you? I want you to come over to work for me as general manager. You're out of your mind. I don't know anything at all about the automobile business, especially about fancy cars like you have out there. I know. I have people who deal in those things. What do you need me for? Angela seemed a little nervous. She looked back and forth at her feet, then at the walls. Her eyes darted around as she tried to string together a few words. Did you see the way my men looked at you when you came up to the office with me? Yes. They didn't smile. They all think you killed Tony. Not only did you kill him, but you made a fool of yourself when you did it. They were all afraid of Tony. Now they seem to be afraid of you. Their fear is like respect. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? They don't respect you? No. They're going to rip me off left and right, and there's not a damn thing I can do about it. I'm not smart enough or tough enough to keep them in line. What good can I do? Basically, just be here. After a while, we'll both learn the business well enough to control what happens. In the meantime, I need you to intimidate them. I'm a good guy, Angela. That's why Tony and my wife have been trying to take advantage of me. She looked a little calmer now. That didn't work out too well for them, did it? For some odd reason, I found that amusing, and I even laughed a little. For the next 30 minutes, Angela and I discussed the terms. She had no trouble exceeding the salary and benefits I was getting at the factory. If things didn't work out, I could always come back. I didn't really want to go back. I wanted things to get better. When we got downstairs, Todd wasn't looking his best. Too many hot dogs and too many sodas. Terry, on the other hand, was having a great time. He seemed to spend more time talking to Carla than looking at cars. That was definitely a good sign. On the way home, Todd threw up in the truck and missed dinner. I started work that Monday. Everything went exactly as Angela had predicted. I was amazed at how quickly I was able to settle into the job. I bonded with several employees and soon had eyes and ears on the floor. The blue shirt who smiled broadly at me on my first day was Glenn's cousin, who was my strongest supporter. Most of the employees wanted the business to thrive and were willing to snitch on the bad apples. Angela let me handle the layoffs, and I found that I enjoyed it. I was really living up to my reputation. Detective Green stopped by for coffee with me a few times, but the conversation was usually light and friendly. Finally, I got him to open up a little. 3 years ago, I was working as a police officer in Philadelphia. I came home one day and found my wife in bed with my supervisor. I beat the shit out of him right on the spot and kicked my wife out. The police department gave me a choice: quit or get fired. A week later, I got a job here. Before I left, I made sure that son of a bitch who abused my wife was let go too. I didn't bother to pry further information out of him. That was his business. At least I understood why he seemed to be leaning toward my side. The boys agreed not to mention my new job to their mother on visitation days. They made a few remarks about the long drive, but seemed to realize there was no getting away from it. I felt it was important for Marcy to see her sons, not for her benefit, but so I could pour salt on the wounds. I know, it's a nefarious way to use my children, but I took some sneaky pleasure in it. Angela and I started spending more time together, at work and after work. One weekend, the boys insisted that I take her and Carla to Noble's Grove. Most of the time, we just stayed closer to home. These living conditions seemed to complicate any chance of a romantic relationship. I was definitely interested in a closer relationship with Angela, but it was uncomfortable. I was still living in my parents' house with the boys, and Angela and Carla had a small studio apartment. Since things in the business were going much better than expected, Angela started talking about finding a house to buy. She spent a lot of time on the computer looking for the perfect one. I was first wary when she explained why she wanted a 4-bedroom house. Danny, I think it's important that the boys have their own room. It's better to take care of these things now than to have to remodel everything later. Don't you agree? Of course, I realized right away that the question was a setup. I also realized that Angela sensed in me something more than just an employee. The potential for romance was looking better and better. Yes, I think it's a great idea. I also think separate bedrooms would be a good idea to consider. I don't like them being too close to the master bedroom. I walked out of the study right after saying those words and noticed a small smile on her face. It was a strange relationship. We had never had sex or even come close to it. We had never even kissed once, but I felt closer to her than I had to Marcy in the last 12 years. 2 days later, when my divorce from Marcy was final, we all went to Red Lobster to celebrate. The kids didn't know the reason for the party, but Angela did. Later, back at the apartment, the kids were watching a movie on Pay-For-View when Angela cornered me in the kitchen and stood on tiptoe to kiss me. We were hugging and giggling a little when Carla walked into the room. Oops, sorry, Mom. Turning to leave, she added, just in time. When we returned to the living room, Carla was whispering in Terry's ear and they were both smiling. For the rest of the evening, Angela and I behaved as usual, but I was anxious to see what would happen next. The next day, while the kids were at school, Angela and I took a long lunch and went back to the apartment. We both had a lot of energy to burn off. We didn't get back to work until just before lights out. There were many more long lunches after that, and Angela began to seriously consider looking for a house. Detective Green stopped by regularly, most often just to chat, but occasionally he would look into the cars. He fell in love with a Studebaker Hawk that used to belong to Roger Ebert, a movie critic. Angela offered him a good price. Danny, I need you to take me to Marcy's. It was an unexpected request. The boys and I started going less often than we used to, but Marcy never seemed to complain. Any particular reason? Closure. I need closure. I'd never understood what that meant. I knew all the words that described it, but the concept itself seemed to elude me. You want me to come with you? Just take me there. You don't have to be with me when I talk to her. It was a warm, sunny fall day when we arrived in Muncie. Inmate visits were held outside, so I parked by the fence. 10 minutes later, Marcy and Angela came out to the exercise yard and sat at one of the tables. They chatted and smiled like they were long-lost friends. After 5 minutes, things got interesting. The smile disappeared from Marcy's face. She leaned back against the picnic table and scowled at her guest. Angela, on the other hand, still looked happy. Marcy suddenly swung across the table and tried to grab her. Several guards quickly foiled the attempt and, kicking and screaming, led my ex-wife back into the building. Angela turned, looked at me, smiled and shrugged, then left the visitors area. She was still smirking as she walked back to the car. What the hell was that? Your ex-wife sure is a touchy bitch? Angela seemed to giggle to herself. We drove for a few miles and then she turned slightly, straining against her seatbelt. I introduced myself and she seemed pleased to see me. Everything was fine as long as she thought I was on her side. I admit I misled her a little at first. What do you mean? I told her I'd come all the way from Baltimore to get revenge. That seemed to please her, because she thought I had turned against you. Of course, what I really meant was that I was going to get even with Tony by taking over his business. I guess you can still get revenge on a dead man, right? Okay, but what got her so upset? She wanted specifics. When, where, and how? Of course, I realized she meant you. Now I was getting curious. I told her it would take a long, long time and asked if she wanted me to keep her informed of progress. She readily agreed and insisted on knowing exactly how I planned to do it. When I told her how I was going to do it, she exploded. She lost her head. She went crazy. It was great. Okay. How the hell are you going to destroy me? Now I want to know. Her smile grew even wider. I told her I was going to entertain you to death. That's it? Yes. Funny, isn't it? I thought she might get mad, but I didn't expect her to go for it. Everything went quiet for a few moments. We both sat there smiling. I was so proud of her. When do you plan to launch this attack? As soon as we get to the next motel, silly. 2 months later, Angela and I were married. It was a small ceremony in the backyard of our new home. Angela sent Marcy a wedding invitation with a little note inside. Everything is going according to plan. He should be dead in 40 or 50 years. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.